Good evening. Welcome to Southern California Edison's Wildfire Safety Community Livestream meeting for the Santa Clarita Valley. My name is Liz Seelman, and I am a Government Relations Manager for Southern California Edison. We greatly appreciate that you took the time to participate this evening, as well as submitting your questions when you signed up. I would also like to take this time to thank the City of Santa Clarita, as well as our state and federal elected officials and their staff for joining us tonight. We appreciate that you always have open lines of communication, and we look forward to our ongoing partnership. Let me start by saying that we recognize how important it is for you and your families to have electricity, especially during a pandemic when many of us are working and learning from home. Our company is focused on safely providing reliable service to our customers and our communities. Our number one priority remains public safety. As California prepares for the upcoming wildfire season, we want to provide you with the latest information on how we're preparing and what you can do to be prepared. During the most recent wildfire season, we implemented public safety power shutoffs, or PSPS for short, to reduce the threat of wildfires. We know many of you experienced multiple PSPS events. We also recognize that these outages are both painful and very impactful, and we heard your concerns. We are committed to reducing the need to use PSPS outages, and we will be sharing more information on those efforts with you this evening. Please know, if you get disconnected or if you need to drop off early, this meeting is being recorded and it will be posted on our website at sce.com/wildfire. As always, your feedback is extremely important to us, and we encourage you to submit questions. Because we have a large number of attendees, we will be taking questions through the Q&A window. You should be able to see the window on your right-hand side. If there is a similar question already being asked that you would like answered, you can click on the heart icon next to the question to like it. We will address the questions that receive the most likes first, and we will go down from there. We ask that you please ask questions that are relevant to the topic and the material being presented, and we will do our very best to answer as many questions as possible in the allotted time. So here are tonight's SCE presenters. We have Eric Takayasu, Vice President of PSPS Readiness, who will share updates on our wildfire mitigation and our PSPS action plans. Then Terry Ohanian, Director of Expedited Grid Hardening, will share our efforts to reduce the need for PSPS. And finally, Dave Kynes, Senior Manager with Customer Service, will share information on how customer care and community engagement efforts. And these are the topics that we will cover as part of our presentation: the 2020 wildfire season, SCE's wildfire mitigation and PSPS action plans, our efforts to reduce the need for PSPS, updates on notifications and customer care programs, as well as community outreach efforts and resources. Following our presentation, we will then open it up for Q&A to answer your submitted questions. At this time, I will hand it over to Eric to talk about our wildfire mitigation and PSPS action plans. Eric?
Thank you, Liz, and good evening, everyone. I want to express my sincere appreciation for your participation and engagement in joining us today. We have a lot of information to cover, and we look forward to your questions. Now, our conversation today is about wildfire safety overall, and will include improvements that we're making to our public safety power shutoff program. 2020 was a year of unimaginable tragedy for many Californians. Across the state, 2020 was the worst year on record, with nearly 10,000 fires that burned over 4.2 million acres and consumed about 4% of all the land in California. And here in Southern California, from summer to the end of the year, we had experienced record dry fuel levels and heat waves and lack of precipitation. We saw 70% more red flag days in 2020 versus 2019, and rainfall totals in Central and Southern California were 50 to 75% below average. And as you can see here on this chart, 5 of the 6 largest wildfires in California all happened in 2020, which is a sobering statistic and highlights the need for all of us to stay focused on our efforts to reduce the risks and mitigate the impacts. Next slide. And towards the end of the year, we had more Santa Ana wind events, ultimately impacting 138,000 of our customers, adding to the challenges with the COVID-19 pandemic. We understand the difficulties that being without power has for our vulnerable customers, people working from home, and children going to school online. And with the weather patterns experienced in 2020, the PSPS events we saw between November and December and into mid-January were a much different experience than what we saw in 2019. Now, all of this underscores the importance of having a more resilient grid that will significantly reduce the risk of utility equipment sparking large and catastrophic wildfires, and the need for PSPS to be used as a measure of last resort. And so SE remains dedicated to keeping our communities safe by making our infrastructure more resilient against the increasing threat of extreme conditions that are driven by climate change. And as we look ahead in preparing for 2021, we need to take into account the events of 2020 and are working to make significant progress in reducing the risk of wildfires, as well as reducing the impact of PSPS. And so our wildfire mitigation plan and our PSPS action plans work together to achieve these priorities. Now, this slide summarizes the key achievements in our wildfire mitigation plan, which we met or exceeded despite the challenges posed by COVID-19, and as you can see in the percentages listed in the column. To improve the overall efficient resiliency of our infrastructure, we installed over 960 miles of insulated conductor and over 6,000 fire-resistant poles, performed detailed inspections of our distribution and transmission infrastructure, and assessed nearly 100,000 trees and removed more than 12,200 that could have fallen into power lines and lead to ignitions. We also installed over 3,000 fast-acting fuses and 49 additional devices to better segment our system that will further support reducing PSPS. We are also bolstering our situational awareness through our network of 166 high-definition cameras that cover our high fire risk areas and installed an additional 590 weather stations to now have over 1,000 monitoring real-time conditions that help us assess conditions in real time. Now, these actions are intended to continue increasing the resilience of our infrastructure that will help to minimize service disruptions during fires, regardless of ignition source. This will also support improving fire agencies' ability to detect and respond to emerging fires, as well as continually improve the coordination between utility, state, and local management personnel. We want to thank California's leadership, lawmakers, and various agency personnel for addressing what is critically important to protect public safety. We are proud of our partnership with local and tribal governments, first responders, and the public who have all come together to further reduce the risk of potentially devastating wildfires. And as we turn our attention to PSPS, we're building upon the work from our wildfire mitigation activities and adding to it additional criteria and requirements to directly address the frequency and impact that PSPS has had on our communities. Now, we seriously take the concerns, and we've heard from a number of folks from the public and our government and our policymakers around our PSPS execution, and we know we have to do better. On February 12th, we filed our action plan with the California Public Utilities Commission that addressed 5 main areas: to reduce the need for PSPS, improve our execution, reduce the impact of PSPS when events do occur, keep our customers and partners informed, and enhance our after-action post-event reports, which we file after every event. I'll summarize these 5 areas and then hand it over to our other presenters who will cover much of this in more detail. Now, the first area addresses reducing the need for PSPS, which means hardening the grid, especially to help those areas and locations where our customers have been impacted numerous times. Now, while PSPS has impacted about 20% of our infrastructure located in high fire risk areas, communities like Santa Clarita Valley have been impacted on numerous occasions. So in our action plan, we are specifically focusing on those frequently impacted circuits that have experienced 4 or more de-energizations since 2019, including January of this year, with the goal of reducing the scope, frequency, and duration of PSPS events. Our work scope includes accelerating grid hardening work on 72 circuits by replacing our bare overhead wire with insulated conductors, reviewing our operations, and adding more automation to our distribution system. While this doesn't mean that there won't be situations in which PSPS won't still be needed, the frequency and duration significantly decrease, as you'll hear about more in the next few slides. The second area of focus is to improve our execution of PSPS events. And one of the ways we expect to do that is providing better transparency into the decision-making process. This means providing more information through various channels, including our website, to provide a better understanding of our PSPS processes and protocols and factors that go into the decision-making process. We're also going to be making significant improvements to our PSPS notifications that you receive before, during, and after events. We understand the issues and frustrations surrounding how notifications of PSPS events are received, and that we need to do a better job of informing our customers about the status to better prepare you for when they do occur. And for people who are on medical baseline, we'll be ensuring that notifications are positively received in addition to our critical care customers. And when PSPS events do occur, we will be increasing our efforts to reduce the impact, especially on our most vulnerable. We'll be working to increase enrollment in our medical baseline program and expand participation in areas such as our critical care battery backup program and other incentives to support providing more backup solutions. We'll also be working with local and tribal governments to look for ways to increase community resiliency by expanding our services that will enhance the safety of our communities overall. Now, the fourth area of focus is to keep our partners and customers clearly informed and consistently informed. You can better expect ways to receive educational materials, including our website, for more information about PSPS. And for our partners, we will be leveraging technology to improve information sharing and coordination as we work together to plan and respond in a more comprehensive way. And lastly, we're working to enhance and improve our post-event reporting to make them more transparent and clear for our stakeholders. We've learned a lot in our experiences so far, and these reports go a long way in improving our performance after every event. So in a nutshell, the outcomes that we are expecting are to reduce the scope and frequency of PSPS, improve our coordination and engagement with our partners and critical infrastructure customers, expand our outreach and enrollment with vulnerable customers, and improve our post-event reports. And now I'm going to hand it over to Terry to cover grid hardening and our efforts to reduce the need for PSPS.
Thank you, Eric. Good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining us. I'll be covering one of our focus areas, which is to reduce the need for PSPS. Eric spoke briefly about it earlier. To this end, we've developed a real concentrated effort focusing primarily on these frequently impacted circuits, or the circuits that experience 4 or more PSPS de-energizations since 2019 through 2021. And the effort is targeted on the hardest hit communities, but I do want to reinforce that our general grid hardening effort goes well beyond these hard hit circuits. So I don't want to imply that we're ignoring other customers or that other circuits are left behind, but I do believe it's appropriate to focus this concerted effort on those that experienced the most events over the past couple of years. So this targeted effort, or what we're calling expedited grid hardening, is what I'll primarily be discussing today. Our goal is to achieve reductions in scope, or the number of customers impacted, reductions in the number of PSPS events, and also reductions in the duration of an event should it occur. And also to complete this work in the time frame between now and October 1, which is historically when we see our highest PSPS impacts. The PSPS events really begin to start around October, continue into November. Traditionally taper a little bit in December. Last year was unusual because it actually went the other way in December and on into January. But the issue here is to be ready by October. And what we'll share today is where we are at this point. We understand 2020 was a particularly difficult year, and we learned from these events so we can improve. And the actual events from prior years gives us a lot of insight on very specific areas that we can target. So this expedited effort is exploring a number of tools that we believe will improve the customer experience. Some of these tools, on the next slide, some of these tools were shown utilized on this table. The key, again, is what we can do in a short time frame. Insulated wires, which we also refer to as covered conductor, is an effort to replace our bare wire. So I just want to be clear here. We're not covering our bare wire with an insulation. We are replacing the wire altogether with new wire that is insulated. So bare wire that we have today, it's open to the elements, and if things come in contact with these wires, much like what would happen, if you create a short circuit in your home wiring, and anyone that's done that knows it can create quite a flash, quite a spark. There is no difference when a palm frond or a tree branch or other debris blows into our lines. It creates a short circuit and a spark. So covering our wires or installing new insulated wire eliminates this unintentional contact from becoming an ignition by harmlessly allowing the debris to flow in and out of our lines, because the wire will have this insulation layer around it. And by insulating our wires, we're also able to raise our wind speed thresholds before we de-energize for PSPS. And in some cases, we can raise it to a level where PSPS events become unlikely. I also want to note that insulating our wire or installing this new insulated wire has reliability benefits beyond PSPS as wind events occur throughout the year. I know you all know that. And these can cause de-energization. It's not just PSPS related. It comes from accidental contact from other objects, and these would otherwise cause a circuit to de-energize. But with covered wires, the circuit can often remain energized, even if vegetation or a mylar balloon or other debris blows into our lines. The second method listed here is segmentation. This was a focus area for us last year, and we're building on this in 2021. And it involves installing remote-controlled automated switches that allow us to quickly de-energize specific smaller areas of concern. So the benefit here is that we can reduce the number of customers impacted or even the duration of an event for some customers. The third method is installing new weather stations. They're another way we can reduce PSPS. This improves our awareness on the ground with constant wind, temperature, humidity, and other weather data. And it gives us more precision about weather at specific locations. And when you couple that with automated switches, it gives us the ability to focus PSPS on these smaller areas. The next tool listed here is enhanced switching protocols. Many of our circuits have an electrical connection to an adjacent circuit. So if an adjacent circuit is not impacted, or let's say it's already been hardened, then there may be opportunities to switch customers, some customers at least, to an adjacent circuit. And it would have to be customers located in an area where we didn't have a concern. And through the use of an automated switch, some of which I just described, and we can decouple a portion of our customers that are not in a high wind area from their main circuit and move them over to the nearby circuit. So again, this only works if the nearby circuit is not affected by PSPS. But as we do continue to harden all of our circuits, we get more and more of this community benefit effect where nearby circuits are hardened and it has a benefit for the circuits around it. So we also know from the past few years which circuits tend to be more impacted. So we now know where good opportunities to switch exist because of our historical experience. So I have an example of this in a couple slides, and I'll try to show you how that may work. The fifth item listed here is updating our operational protocols for the use of PSPS. And this is where, based on recent changes in the environment, certain circuits or portion of circuits can be removed from PSPS. An example of that might be a lack of vegetation. So the fuel for a fire may no longer exist in an area, and that may be possible due to a recent fire. We call that a burn scar. So the fuels may no longer be present. And that would give us the opportunity, particularly as we get into these smaller areas, to be able to say, that area is no longer a concern. Okay, so now let's take a closer look at some of the frequently impacted circuits in the Santa Clarita area. And I'll do this at a high level. I know this circuit is really small, so I apologize for the small print, but let me just do a flyover here. It represents 9 frequently impacted circuits in the Santa Clarita Valley area. The shading indicates what type of activity, the primary activity that we're doing. And so let me explain the colors. The yellow shading is where we have construction work planned. I mentioned some of these earlier, such as installing new covered wire to replace our existing bare wire. It's a significant effort. It requires, in some cases, tens of miles on a circuit. And oftentimes it involves not just replacing the wire, but also replacing poles and other hardware. It's also where we're installing new remote controlled automated devices, as well as the weather stations that I mentioned. So some of this work, let me just say, unfortunately, it will require planned maintenance outages, we are working hard to minimize those impacts as best we can, as we know that many of you have gone through multiple de-energizations already. The green areas show where we believe through operational protocols we can significantly reduce the need for PSPS. And so again, this involves updated conditions along a circuit route where an ignition risk is either temporarily or permanently abated. So, you know, what I mentioned earlier about fuel conditions on the ground, if we don't believe they're there anymore, those green areas is where we think we may be able to take advantage of some of those. It could also involve placing observers at specific locations along a line route. If it's a small enough area, we may be able to put electrical utility workers and just position them there and watch the line throughout the event and give us sort of that real-time boots on the ground view of what they're seeing. And lastly, the blue is where we've been able to analyze past events and identify these opportunities for switching customers to adjacent circuitry. So that's what we called switching protocols on the previous slide. And oftentimes this can occur when you have an underground area that may have an electrical connection to an adjacent circuit. So you have a portion of an overhead area that's not a concern, can be isolated and connected to a circuit. So any of these can exist and connect to something adjacent that is not being impacted by PSPS. Okay, so let me just answer a question that we typically get before I move on to the example. You know, first is, why do my neighbors across the street have power? And the second one related to this is, why am I de-energized if I live in an underground area? And the answer is that it depends on the circuit that feeds your home as compared to your neighbor. So the picture here is intended to depict homes on the left side of the diagram. They are fed from an underground service. And before it goes underground, the circuit has an overhead section that traverses over that hilly terrain. It's high fire area. And that's off on the far left of the picture. So these homes, presumably here in a fire designated area, can be subject to PSPS. Across the street in this example, these homes are fed from a different circuit. And in this example, it's all overhead circuitry, does not traverse through high fire area, and therefore are not subject to PSPS. So just an example of, and this can happen, you can have neighborhoods where some homes are fed from a different circuit, and that circuit could be outside of our high fire area, and nearby homes are fed from a circuit that are. So just wanted to provide this context. It's a common question. So now I want to get into an actual example. This is the Arlene circuit. This is an actual circuit in the Santa Clarita area. It has almost 1,700 customers. And the map on the left, let me just try to orient you to what some of these things mean. On the map, the underground portions are shown in green and the overhead portions are shown in orange. The substation that the circuit originates from is called Solomon Sub. It's in the upper right portion of the map. It's represented as this green square. The substation, think of the substation as where the electricity originates from. In this case, it goes from the substation in the upper right and traverses in this southwesterly direction, diagonally down, and it actually follows Sierra Highway here down to the lower left portion of the map. And there it ends with some rather large green areas, which are all underground. So the main circuit out of the substation is all overhead. I put it in that thicker orange line so you can see it better. That's what we call the main line portion of the circuit. And these orange areas are the portions on this particular circuit that we are concerned about during a PSPS event. And in this case, you can see why some of these underground areas are, towards the end of that circuit can be impacted during PSPS events, because that thick orange line feeds those underground areas. So let me move on to what the team did as they reviewed this particular circuit. They focused on, let's go back really quick, the previous slide. So thank you. So the team focused on what can be done to reduce the need for PSPS. And in this case, we already had insulated wire scope being planned for 2021. So the key here for that would be to finish it prior to October, but it was about 4 miles of the 7.6 miles of overhead that exists on this circuit. So there was a challenge here that in order to fully cover this wire, we had to bring in scope that was actually planned for 2022 and advance it into 2021. It's about 3.6 miles. And in this case, fortunately, it was already in the planning phase because being that it was planned in 2022, we typically design our projects the year prior, so we're ready for the next year when we're performing the construction work. So it was already in the planning phase, already in the design phase. And so the team's recommendation was to bring it all into 2021 and complete it all by the October timeframe. And by covering all the overhead portions, we're able to increase the thresholds that, before which we would engage in a PSPS de-energization. The other mitigation that's listed here it involves an underground portion of the circuit that's shown in that dashed oval. And this portion of the Arlene has a circuit tie, a connection, an electrical connection with an adjacent circuit. And fortunately, what we have learned through our 3 years of PSPS experience is that adjacent circuit is not as impacted. It's called the Python. So what we would do here is before a PSPS de-energization were to occur, and that would be the goal, before we de-energize, we would first move those customers to the adjacent circuit. And again, that assumes the Python is not impacted, but our experience has been that that is typically the case, that the Python isn't de-energized. So we've now memorialized this process in our PSPS procedures. So let me get to what this all means. And that's in the lower right portion, the words there, those last few bullets, brings us to the benefits of doing this work. The Arlene experienced 4 events in 2020. 3 of these events, we believe, would not have occurred. They did not exceed the elevated covered conductor thresholds that we would employ if we could fully cover all the overhead portions. So I'll say it this way, if history repeats itself, we believe it is highly likely that 3 of the 4 de-energization events would not have occurred. The 4th event, the other event that did occur, it breached, it was pretty severe winds. It was over 60 miles an hour on that particular event. But on that one, we would perform the switching I just described. We'd move those, the underground customers in that dashed oval portion over to the Python, to the adjacent circuit. And that would reduce the impact by about 1,000 customers from that near 1,700 customers that are on the circuit. So furthermore, after we looked at the wind speed profiles, we believe there also would be, for the customers that still remain, that still experience the de-energization event because they're either fed from an overhead section or they're on an overhead section, that there would be a significant reduction in the duration of the event that actually occurs. And the reason for that is because when you raise the thresholds, the wind speeds, at the beginning of the event are rising. And they actually bounce around quite a bit, but they're generally going up. You'll breach the higher threshold later in the event. And on the other side, as the winds start to diminish, you'll cross back over it sooner. So the overall duration, it becomes less. And in this case, it actually cuts to about a half of the duration that was actually experienced in 2020. So we think there are considerable benefits here to doing this work. The duration for those that experience the event would be reduced, and many customers would avoid de-energization altogether. So it represents an example of a circuit. Obviously, they're all different. We spent quite a bit of time going through each individual circuit and determining the mitigations that we thought were possible for this upcoming, fall season. But the focus really was to reduce or eliminate the need for PSPS. And there's obstacles to overcome. We're expediting construction. There's permitting that we need to secure. There's environmental constraints. There's potential for inclement weather. We could have summer heat storms and other factors. In addition to the outages I just mentioned, there's going to be planned maintenance outages to get this work done as well. But we have a committed focus to doing this and getting this work completed before October. So let's now move to what does this mean in the aggregate? So these are all the frequently impacted circuits. I just covered the Arlene, but there are 8 other ones in the area. And this graph depicts the results similar to the Arlene, the results of all the circuit analysis and reviews we did, factoring in the mitigations we developed for each of those circuits thus far. The gray bar represents what actually occurred in 2020, and the orange is what we believe would happen if we had the mitigations in place that we have developed, for these circuits. Now you don't see orange bars for some circuits. That's because we're calling those fully mitigated, in terms of the work that we're doing. It means that if 2020 were to repeat itself, there would not be any PSPS events for those circuits. And, the outcomes do assume same weather conditions as last year, so no one can predict the weather this fall. We don't know if it will in fact be a repeat. I will say from our own experience, 2020 was an impactful year. But let me comment on a few of the circuits here. I already talked about the Arlene. The Bouquet and the Tuba did not have any de-energization events in 2020. They did have them in 19 and they did have them in 2021, so I want to be clear about that. But that doesn't mean we're not doing work. So on the Bouquet, we're actually planning to install insulated wires on all the circuit. It's quite a bit of work, and that, in our view, would make PSPS even more unlikely. And on the Tuba, we didn't have any events in 2020. Our work is primarily in 2022 for that one, but again, with history being what it was in 2020, that there may not in fact be events, at least from our perspective, for 2021. The guitar, circuit about in the middle of the page here, did not show any impacts in 2020. But they showed few impacts in 2020, but the few customers they did impact, these were commercial customers, so they're larger, resulted in an impact to the commercial community. And there we are fully mitigating with the work that we are doing. So we believe that the likelihood is that we would not have events. Again, we're not talking about extreme wind conditions, that the possibility exists, but if we experience what we experienced in 2020, then we shouldn't have any. Same is true for the clarinet. There's actually a very small gray bar there. You can't see it, but the work we're performing tells us that even that goes away in 2021. The Cobra shows considerable improvement, but still would have PSPS impacts. However, let me just say that we are installing a weather station on a portion of that circuit that we believe will result in even greater benefits than what is depicted here. We just don't have a good way to calculate what it would be, but our just from experience, we have a suspicion that certain portions of that circuit are not experiencing the kind of wind conditions, and if the weather station proves that to be true, we would not de-energize those portions. The Sand Canyon improved about 40%. We continue to look at that to see if there's any other opportunities. We've been working on that this week. And the Hillfield and the Racer, these were consequential in 2020. They are expected to be fully mitigated. And again, I want to be clear what I mean by fully mitigated. It means the events we experienced in 2020 would not have resulted in PSPS de-energizations had they been in place. Okay, and so overall, I mentioned this earlier, the overall community benefit is a reduction, an 81% reduction in the use of PSPS if we can achieve this work. I'll move here to my last slide. It's just talk briefly on vegetation management. As was talked about briefly earlier, veg management is an important component of our wildfire mitigation plan, and we now inspect about 1.4 million trees across our territory every year to determine if they could pose a hazard by making contact with our power lines. So in addition, we have tall trees, some of them up to 200 feet away from our wires. We will be assessing these and may be pruned or removed if they demonstrate a high fire risk as falling into our lines. And we'll continue to remove dead, dying, and diseased trees in these high fire risk areas. But let me also point out in the box off to the right, we will also be removing palm trees that may come in contact with our power lines. Palm trees are a nuisance for us. They become wind sails in the wind, and they pose risks to public safety. So customers who have palm trees affected by this program will be contacted by Edison representatives to discuss this and their options. So with that, I'm going to now hand it over to David to talk about our customer and community engagement.
Thank you, Terry. Great information to share. And I know personally I'm excited about all the great work we're doing to help reduce the need for PSPS. I think that message is pretty clear. So for the Santa Clarita community, again, on SCE's behalf, I want to thank you for committing your time this evening to be with us. The next 4 slides that I get the privilege of going over are really how we engage and interact with you. And so I'm going to be covering first notifications. I will say that we had high expectations on delivering appropriate communication through notifications to our customers, and we have fallen short, quite frankly. And so as a result of that, we have basically made some immediate improvements, and we're doing an end-to-end review of the entire process on how we can improve communicating with you pre, during, and post events. So let me start by saying we need to be more transparent and clear when we notify you. And I'll give you an example. When you receive a notification and it says there's going to be an imminent de-energization, to you, you may define that as meaning my power is going to go out in the next 15 minutes. In reality, on the SCE side, it may mean your power is going to go out in the next hour, 2 hours, possibly 3 hours. So there's a gap in how we're communicating with you that we need to fix. So we're more consistent and clear and provide a better understanding of what's happening. So that's one example of clear and transparent communication. We also introduced new what we call zip code alerts last year, and we had great intentions again of providing additional notification capability. But what happened in hindsight is it caused confusion. The zip code alerts were really intended for non-SCE customers to be able to enter a zip code to be alerted if there's an outage. If you had a loved one that or a parent, child that lived in an SCE service territory and you wanted to know if they were de-energized or had an outage, you could sign up for the zip code alert and be notified. On the other hand, we have outage alerts that are designed for you, the SCE customer, to be alerted and aware of an outage. So it's at an address level, and that's the one where we've asked you to sign up through your My account on SCE.com. So we need to correct and decouple some of those notifications so we can remove some of that confusion, and we're actively working on that. The last bullet on the left here is thanks to you, we have been informed that during outages, in many locations, we have safety concerns with respect to a lack of cell service. And so as a result of that, we have been working with our local county offices of emergency to see if we can somehow partner with them and use their emergency radio broadcast systems to be able to communicate and notify you through those tools. So those are some of the activities that are going on. As I mentioned, we're doing an end-to-end review of the entire notification process. We plan to launch that new process June 1st, so more to come on that. In the middle of the slide, how to stay informed. We have many options for you, and they're really based on your choice of communication. So we can text you to your cell on an alert. We can call you and send you a pre-recorded message, and we can email you. In addition to that, we also work with Nextdoor, the app, and you can also be alerted through that particular app if you use it. So there's one key point on this slide that I just always want to emphasize, and that is none of this information is valuable to you unless you have signed up for the alerts. So I want to encourage anyone who's listening this evening, if you are not already signed up for outage alerts, please do so through se.com through your My account. All right, let's move on to the next slide, please. And on this one, this is an area that's a little closer to home for me personally. I spend most of my time at Edison working on developing programs to help mitigate the impact of PSPS. So what does that mean? I'll go through some examples. I'm going to spend a little more time on this first one on the upper left because I really think it's important. So we call it the Critical Care Battery Backup Program, and it's designed to help our most vulnerable customers. These are customers who have a critical medical dependency on medical equipment, life-threatening, an oxygen concentrator, a nebulizer. And when we de-energize and a customer loses power, they potentially lose access to that device. So we developed and launched a program last year to provide a fully subsidized battery and solar panels to power that critical medical equipment. And we identified medical baseline customers living in high fire risk areas, income qualified, that were identified as critical care, approximately 2,500 customers. Again, fully subsidized solution that we have hired trained contractors to install those batteries. We have enhanced that program now to drop the critical care element of that. So all medical baseline customers are now eligible. Medical baseline living in high fire risk area that are income qualified. And it greatly increased the population of customers that are eligible. So that's a great program. Again, it addresses a need for our most vulnerable customers. I'm going to try to move through the rest of this slide a little quicker, but I wanted to emphasize that one. We also have rebates that are really, they're targeted to help customers invest in resiliency. The first one is a $50 rebate on portable power stations, batteries, that can help you power typically smaller devices in your home, a modem or router, some limited lighting, a TV, and this will enable you to keep your internet up and your access to those critical services that you might need during an outage. The batteries, they can range from $100 up to several $1,000s. The $50 is really just a encouragement to participate in that resiliency effort. A larger need that, quite frankly, a lot of customers in Santa Clarita area and surrounding areas have brought to SE's attention is the need to pump water. You may be on a well or a tank, and when we de-energize, you lose the ability to pump water. So we launched a program. It's for a $300 to $500 rebate towards the purchase of a fossil fuel generator to power that pump to pump water. We are enhancing that program. I'm not going to go into detail on the enhancement, but more to come on that in the coming weeks and months. We're trying to make that program available to more people. The last bullet on the programs is our self-generation incentive program. And this is a whole home battery. It's a state-funded program, well-funded, and it enables customers living in high fire risk areas, income qualified, to work with a contractor to install a whole home battery that can power the home during an outage. So this is really an attractive program. I highly recommend customers to look into this. All of this information is on our SCE resources webpage, and this presentation has a link to those sites. Quickly, during an outage, we provide services again to help mitigate the impact. Many of you may have seen our community crew vehicles or have visited our community resource centers during a PSPS event. These are our yellow and black vans and trucks that we deploy, as well as brick and mortar store sites, if you will. It could be a community center, a senior center, it could be College of the Canyons. Other locations where we have contracted with site owners or facility owners to utilize the site during an event. The intent here is we provide trained SCE resources to help you during a PSPS event. We are there to answer questions. We hand out a number of things, including with COVID, a resiliency kit that has mask, gloves, hand sanitizer. We hand out snacks, fact sheets on all of our programs. So if you haven't had the opportunity, should we have another event to stop by, please consider it. We also are working with several local hotels in the Santa Clarita area to provide discounts and reduced rates for customers impacted by a PSPS event. So that's also on our website. We actually have 4 hotels in the area that are working with us on that. Far right, I want to talk a little bit about some of our bill assistance programs. The medical baseline is actually a rate that provides an increased tier 1 baseline. So it keeps you in that lower rate of electricity for a longer period of time. Ultimately, it could reduce your rate. It is also a key to many of our programs that we have, such as the Critical Care Battery Backup Program. So I encourage you, if you would, please look into this program, see if you qualify, if you are dependent on medical equipment, and sign up for that one. The Care Fair program is our income qualified assistance program to reduce the rate of electricity. For care, it's a 30% discount, and FARA is based more on the family number of members in your family, and it's typically about an 18% discount on your bill. Highly recommend you look into those if you could qualify. Energy Assistance Program. This is an annual. It's a nonprofit charity that Edison supports and runs to help fund customers in need. And it's typically an annual grant or gift. It's not a grant, it's a gift. And it can range now with COVID between $200 to $300. So again, it's on our website. Energy Savings Assistance Program. This is geared more towards energy efficiency, but it's a wonderful program for customers who are eligible. You could get a free refrigerator, energy efficient refrigerator. You could get a free heating and air conditioning system, depending on your eligibility, energy efficient lighting, etc. So again, a great program for you to look into. So I know I went into a lot of detail on this slide, but I'm kind of passionate about it. It's really a lot of things that can help you. So if we could go to the next slide, Liz, thank you. So engaging with our customers is extremely important. Tonight's a perfect example of that. We need to hear back from you to understand areas we're falling short on, and so these meetings are extremely important. If you haven't already and you have a question, please consider the Q&A. Do a write-in, and we'll try to respond to that this evening. And then also at the end of the meeting, you'll have an opportunity to provide feedback via survey. So we are doing outreach in several ways through several channels, or you've probably seen commercials, radio ads, social media, and these are just different avenues that we're trying to connect and communicate with you. It's all about trying to provide information that's valuable to you so you can be prepared. You've probably seen our annual PSPS letter that we mail to all customers. Again, our attempt to inform you and keep you aware. The vulnerable customer, Eric touched on this early, and I just want to emphasize that this is really an important part for us, because during a PSPS event, we are super highly sensitive to our most vulnerable customers and ensuring their safety. So we need to have a positive confirmation that they have received awareness of our pending event. If we cannot confirm that via opening an email or responding to a text, we will literally go knock on the door with a field representative to ensure their safety. So this is a very important part. We're also partnering with community-based organizations and other government agencies to improve on the way we provide support. So this one is ongoing. And next slide, please. All right, so thanks. There's my call to action slide. This is where I need to ask you to really take action to make sure you're prepared and informed. So on the left, as we've mentioned all along, we have several pieces of information we've made available on our website. Encourage you all to go to se.com Wildfire. Be familiar with the information that's out there. Also, please provide feedback through this survey form if we're lacking or not addressing issues that you have, because that's how we learn and get better at what we do. The most important thing I hope you take away from my discussion points tonight is please ensure you're signed up for outages. That's the best way to stay informed during an event. You know, we have a lot of great programs that we spend a lot of time and effort on, and we hope that this will bring awareness so you can take advantage of those. And lastly, it's not just PSPS. Any emergency, we all need to be prepared. So whether it is an earthquake, a wildfire, PSPS, or other emergency, we also have tips on our se.com Wildfire page for you to be prepared. Make sure you have that water, stored somewhere for emergencies. Make sure you have everything you need, medicine, etc., to be prepared during an outage. So with that, I think I covered everything, and I'm turning it back over to Liz for Q&A.
Great, thank you so much, Dave. So we're now opening it up to Q&A. Again, thank you all for submitting questions when you registered and through the chat box. We will be efficient in our responses and try to get to as many questions as we can in the allotted time. So let's get started on our first question that came through during registration. And I will pose it first to Eric. And the question is, do I still get electricity from my solar panels when SCE shuts off power?
Thanks for the question. So I assume that we're talking about solar panels that are rooftop solar. And in those cases, those systems are designed to disconnect when the power goes out. And the reason for that is because it would be a dangerous situation if those solar panels were injecting electricity into a faulty condition that happens somewhere on the utility system. So those systems are specifically designed for that. There are other systems that are designed to island. Let's say, for example, that there's a battery storage unit that's coupled with the solar panel. Those can be designed to operate from the battery while it's disconnected from the utility. But for generally speaking, for these kinds of installations, they go out when the power goes out.
Great, thank you for that response. Next question, and I will pose it to you first, once again, Eric. and it was the most liked question tonight. So what is our long-term plan for putting your lines underground, or better yet, why not put our lines underground?
Another great question, and we do get that one quite a bit in these conversations. So Edison considers a wide range of options when it comes to hardening our grid, as Terry kind of walked through the plan for Santa Clarita. This includes looking at potential areas where we can underground, automation, using insulated wires instead of our bare wires. Now, underground systems, the things that we consider is that those designs and the construction is a lot more intensive and often not cost effective or practically feasible when we look at certain rough terrains and issues that we run into during the course of construction in those environments. So overall, they would take a lot longer and at a much higher cost versus solutions that we presented today around automation and deploying those insulated wires. We can get a lot more deployed and make the most difference in a relatively short amount of time. However, we do still consider underground solutions where it makes sense.
Terrific, thank you for that. A question that I will send over to Terry. The question is, why hasn't SCE upgraded its infrastructure to accommodate high winds? This is nothing new.
Yeah, and there's a number of related questions to this as well. Our system is designed to operate safely and reliably, and we're also, our charter is to keep the power on. I mean, that's what we're built to do. But it does become a concern when fuels become a risk, and Eric shared quite a bit of this earlier. Something's happening. I'm not a climatologist or scientist, so I'm not qualified to speak to that, nor will I attempt to. But what I know is that according to CAL FIRE, 5 of the 6 largest fires just occurred last year. I mean, this is since 1932, when CAL FIRE states they have reliable data. I mean, that's 88 years of record keeping, and just in this last year, 5 of the top 6 occurred. So, something is happening here. When Eric also mentioned rainfall averaged 50 to 70% below normal, 70% more red flag days. I can't tell you what it is, but when a spark does occur, the consequences are getting more and more extreme. So we need to respond to this, and we're doing it in several ways. I mean, one is PSPS, but we're also hardening our grid, and now we're expediting the hardening of our grid to try to reduce the need for PSPS. And I'll also say some of the technology is improving. The type of insulated wire in its current form wasn't available not that long ago. So we now have better options to install these insulated wire. We do have some, but it's essentially our underground cable that we put overhead. It's very heavy and difficult to use. So the technology is improving, but things are also occurring, and we have to respond to it and really respond now. And so we are through a number of measures.
Great, thank you for that, Terry. And a question that I'm looking at, I may pose over to you, Dave. Will SCE reimburse me when there is a public safety power shutoff? I do have to get a hotel with a son with special needs because he cannot deal with not having power for extended periods of time.
Yeah, thank you for that question. So the answer is we currently provide the hotel discounts or fixed reduced rates through what I mentioned during my presentation. On occasion, depending on the safety situation during an event, we will assess the need to provide hotels. They're one-off scenarios, but we do address them and respond to them as needed. We do not, by default, offer hotels in general, so it is a one-off situation.
Great, thank you. And Dave, maybe I'll stick with you here. It says, will there be any other financial incentives for homeowners to install backup power, such as generators? And I know we talked about some of our rebates, but maybe you can just see if there's anything else to add on that.
We touched on the portable batteries, which are the smaller batteries. We touched on the generators for pumping water, and the self-generation incentive program really is the program designed for whole home resiliency. Beyond that, I'm not aware of any other programs right now that are being offered.
Okay, thank you for addressing that.
Mm-hmm.
The next question that I see, it says, will these improvements result in higher electric bill rates? Maybe I'll hand that off either Dave or Eric.
You want me to take a shot, Eric? You can.
Sure. Yeah, and I can add any color as well. Thanks.
Okay. So currently, no. In the immediate term, your rates are adjusted based on SEE's annual filings and actually 4-year filings. And as we invest in grid hardening and we invest in the infrastructure, those costs are considered in future filings that are either approved or denied through our regulatory proceeding. I may have butchered that a little bit, and I'm sure Eric can speak to that a little bit more clearly, but yeah, you know, if we put up a pole tomorrow or a covered conductor, it does not have an immediate impact on your electric bill. You want to give it a shot, Eric?
Yeah, no, the only thing I would add is a lot of the work that Terry had covered in the grid hardening space. I do think sometimes we get questions about, okay, what all this is going to cost, because it looks like it's all new work. I will say that the majority of the work that we covered today was planned between now and 2022. And really what our goal here is to accelerate that work into 2021, so we can maximize the benefit for the PSPS reductions that Terry had reviewed. So a lot of the work that we are embarking on had already been planned between now and next year.
Great, thank you both. Terry, I may pose this one to you. We talked through this a bit, but maybe you could provide some more clarity. What are the wind and humidity parameters you use to trigger a PSPS?
Yeah, and Eric is really knowledgeable in this area, but I'll start by saying, you know, it can vary, and there's a number of factors that are considered based on a circuit, and they'll get to a little bit to circuit health and fuel conditions on the ground. So these things can impact the thresholds that we use to decide whether we de-energize or not. And things like covered conductor or insulated wire helps improve the circuit health, which allows us to raise the thresholds. But there's quite a bit of detailed weather data that you know, meteorologists look at and use that to determine you know, actual fuel conditions, where they reside at specific points in time. I think we have forecasting abilities down to a 2 square kilometer grid, and it really informs us where we should be looking, and then the weather stations we look at to make those types of decisions. Eric, anything to add here?
Yeah, so I think you covered it pretty well. I will say that, you know, a quarter or so of Edison's service territory infrastructure falls in high fire risk areas. And when we think about just the size and the amount of area that it covers, you know, there's a lot of unique geographical characteristics. There are microclimates, there are variations in circuit design and topography. So that's the reason why we have to build capabilities to forecast weather at such a granular level, as Terry alluded to, really getting down to a 2 kilometer to forecast specific wind speeds that can occur in our infrastructure. But so it's in addition to winds, it really is about the fuel, as Terry mentioned. So we do have a process to assess the fuel dryness and the potential risk for those fuels to turn into a significant fire should an ignition occur. So we look at the fuels, we look at wind speeds, we establish thresholds to prevent the largest risk from occurring. But that's one of the reasons why the grid hardening work is so important, because by using insulated conductors, it allows us to raise those wind thresholds, and ultimately the system becomes more resilient. So thank you for the question.
Can I add one more thing, Eric? Just that we use actual wind conditions to de-energize. We use the forecast to inform where we should be looking and which customers may be subject to PSPS, but we don't act on a forecast. We act only when we see the winds reach those levels. So it makes it particularly difficult for us in these events because winds can change. They don't always behave exactly as forecast. And the whole goal here is to not de-energize if the wind speeds don't reach those thresholds.
Great, thank you both. This is a question for you, Dave. It says, what is your plan for reimbursing customers for monetary losses, such as food spoilage?
That's a great question, thanks. And it comes up quite frequently. So we have a claims reimbursement process today. Any customer who feels they have a loss, they can open up a claim. Typically, PSPS de-energizations and resulting losses are not covered under a claim, and this falls under a lot of regulatory guidance and approvals. But I'll say that if there is any negligence on SCE's part, which is key, that we take that into consideration as a basis of approving a claim. So it really comes down to what occurred during the event. Did we do something that was negligent that caused you to have a financial loss? And if there is evidence of that, then we will reimburse. If there is none, then today typically those claims do not get approved.
Great, thank you for that update. So this is a question I think I may pose over to Eric first. It says, to better understand the effectiveness of these numerous PSPS events over the past year and understanding the power is cut because wires can come down, can you share with us exactly how many wires actually came down during the wind event? In other words, how many potential fires did we actually avoid as a result of the many hours of being without power?
Thanks. So it's actually pretty hard to be able to quantify, how many fires could have been prevented. What I can say is when we look back from 2019 to 2020, what we do on our system after every PSPS event is we conduct what's called a post-event patrol or post-patrol. And what we're trying to do in those cases is when power has been de-energized, when our circuits are de-energized, in order to safely restore power, we have to conduct a patrol and to make sure that there's no visible or detectable damage. And so when we look back to 2019 and 2020, we have found around 60 instances or so of damage that has occurred in our system that could have resulted in an ignition. And when you look at our overhead electric system, it's actually the 60 is probably very underestimated because most outages on our system are momentary, which means that things come in contact with our lines and then they clear themselves. So sometimes you'll notice, like if you're in a situation where it's raining outside or it's windy outside, sometimes you'll notice power goes out for a while and then comes back. And maybe some of the reasons for that is because we are experiencing these momentary interruptions. So it's really hard to prove whether or not these things have resulted in a wildfire, but when we look at what we do with our fire potential index and our wind speeds and assess those risks, and we've de-energized, we have found instances of damage on our system.
Great, thank you for that. And again, maybe just for Eric or Terry, this is a quick answer here, but where can they see circuit maps, and do we have sectionalized circuit maps for folks to view?
Yeah, it's a good question. We're working on developing some type of visibility for this, and we get asked that a lot. So we're working on it. And hopefully we have something here soon that can provide people a little more information about what's going on with their circuit and where they're at.
Great, thank you for that, Terry. Again, let's see here, maybe this is a good question for Eric. It says, why are the shutoffs for such a long period of time? It puts a burden on everyone, but certainly the elderly. I've had shutoffs for nearly 24 hours.
Yeah, and we recognize the difficulty when these outages they last long. One of the things that we and maybe this is a little bit about the process that we use to restore power. So when we de-energize, it's because in addition to the fuel risk, we see wind speeds that have escalated. And so in order for us to begin the process of restoring power, we have to wait for the very winds that started the event to begin subsiding. And when they've subsided to a point where we know that it's safe to patrol, then we conduct a patrol of our infrastructure to look for any areas that have, as I mentioned earlier, any damage that could prevent a safe restoration. So the process or the length of time that it takes from the time power is out to the time power is restored includes ensuring that first the winds have subsided, and then secondly, giving the crews enough time to patrol and if needed to make repairs if there is damage.
Right, and maybe a quick question that you can answer, Terry, and I think we spoke to this before, but the question is, will all bare wires be replaced by insulated wires? And why were bare wires ever initially installed? We talked about the new technology and high fire risk circuits, but maybe you could just add to that.
Yeah, it won't be all bare wire because there are some areas, even in high fire areas where, the winds just don't pose that type of problem. So we're doing it in a systematic way, and we look at where the greatest ignition risks occur, and we prioritize it that way. The difference being this year, we also looked at it with a different lens, which is how can we reduce the use of PSPS? So because installing covered wire does help reduce the use of PSPS, so we're now looking at both. But the other part to this question, I think we talked about some of this earlier, the why now. Some of it is because the technology has improved, but some of it is also that we just weren't seeing the type of risks that we had before. Our wires are open, and Eric described some of the situations during these wind events where we have found debris in lines that could have resulted in a fire. We'll never know for sure because it's proving a negative, but these conditions, when they do occur, seem to be resulting in far more consequential damage. And I think there was a question here about, we've had fires in the hills and so forth. Fires have occurred, winds have been a constant throughout the years. And there's been sparks, whether it's lightning, whether it's utility lines and other things, but it just seems like the damage that's occurring is becoming very consequential. And I want to say, it seems like almost every year is the worst fire year on record until the next year. And unfortunately, 2020 followed that pattern.
Great, thank you for that response. And Terry, I think I'll stay here with you. And I just want to make sure folks have clarity on this particular question. It is, will these measures eliminate power shutoffs due to wind? And I think they're referring to all of our grid hardening.
The short answer is no. And I know that's probably not the answer people want to hear on the call. Some of them will, but in certain cases, it's going to remain a tool if we see these really extreme, winds, because, it's not just at that point debris coming into our lines. There could be, for example, very tall trees that fall into our lines and bring them down. And even though the wire is covered, where it separates could come to the ground and cause a spark. So there, in these really severe situations, at least in the near term, it's going to remain an option. Our goal is to reduce the need for it. And so I think we're going to make consequential progress, significant progress this year, and we intend to continue making progress year after year.
Great, thank you, Terry. I think we spoke to this as well, but Eric, I'm going to pose this to you. The question is, does each circuit have their own weather station?
Yeah, so I think for the most part, our circuits do have weather stations, and what we really strive to do is to have at least 2 weather stations on every circuit. And the reason for that is because when we have to do a PSPS event, what we're trying to do is to really understand where the risk is on a particular circuit. Circuits, we have more than one way to de-energize circuits. It's not just opening up a circuit breaker and everybody goes out of power. What we try to do is segment our system and then align the situational awareness and weather data with how we could segment our system and de-energize only those portions that are necessary. So we do strive to have at least 1 weather station. We strive for 2. and more depending on the circuit configuration and how we can best operate the system.
Thank you for that. And Dave, I think I'm going to hand this one to you. And the question is the backup solution like a battery backup for solar customers like me? Or I think to rephrase that maybe, for solar customers, what is a good backup solution for them during PSPS?
Thank you for this question. So the combination of solar and battery provides a level of resiliency that can get you through an emergency or an outage. There is some technology that's required to be able to fail over. You have to consider the energy that's being produced by the solar or a discharge of the battery that can backfeed into the grid and cause a safety issue. So there's some very strict rules around it, but the combination of solar and a battery can keep your home energized in the right situation. That's the best scenario.
Great, thank you for that response. And let's see here, I think maybe I'll pose this to Terry, and I know we spoke about this, but there's a couple of questions here, so maybe we could just reiterate the point. They asked, and I've lost power 8 times in 2020 due to PSPS. A number of the times the outage was initiated by a source circuit, not my circuit. Can my circuit be isolated from the source circuit? And a second similar question was, you mentioned at the PUC meeting that before PSPS events, you moved hospitals to other circuits to avoid them from being affected. Can you also move residents affected to other circuits at the same time? So it's kind of the load rolling question for both.
Yeah, I mean, our goal is to do as much of that as possible, and really to use PSPS as a measure of last resort. If those opportunities exist, we're looking for them. And today, so much of what we're doing today is really pouring through what actually occurred. Could we have done something different? Or as we harden, let's say, the adjacent grid, does that afford us the opportunity now to move people to that adjacent grid because it's less subject or no longer subject to PSPS? So it's a constant goal. We're really focused on trying to do this, and we'll continue to look. Regarding the issue of hospitals, there's certain critical facilities, particularly during COVID, when there was efforts to vaccinate and so forth. So there was really a desire to impact these facilities less. So we were looking at that very specifically, but I'll say with all customers, I mean, if we can keep the power up, we are trying to do that. It's not easy. Oftentimes in these events, things are developing quickly, and sometimes even after we de-energize, and when things calm a little bit, we go back and start looking. Where can we re-energize? Where are opportunities for those switching we may have missed in our playbooks? We may have missed when we went through it. So it's this continuous learning. We're always working at trying to get better at that. And I'll say we've been doing this 3 years. It's not a very long time, but each year we add to that ability. We add to that. It's a complex solution to solve sometimes, but some of our switching programs start to look really complicated, multi-step, and in some of them involve really small numbers of customers. I suspect there might be some people that think, why bother? But to us, one customer is one customer too many. So we look for those opportunities, and even if it's a handful of customers, we try to get them back on quicker.
Great, thank you, Terry. Dave, there's a couple of questions here about the SGIP rebate. Mm-hmm. One of them is, I signed up for the SGIP rebate and I'm on a water well. Can I get that rebate as well? And the second question is, SGIP is limited to small businesses. Our store income is higher than the limit. Is there any other programs that can help out businesses?
Okay, good question. So the larger business that wouldn't qualify for SGIP, the generator rebate that we offer, $300 to $500, is something to look into. I don't know that there is several SGIP programs, not just for well water, but for other customers as well. So it's I'll be upfront, it's a very complex statewide program. We have information on our website I would encourage you to go look at. And then if you need additional help, we can put you in touch with the right live person to kind of walk you through. So SCHIP is a great program. There's millions of dollars statewide available to help customers. I encourage all customers to look into it if you qualify. But beyond that, just there's the fossil fuel generator rebate is available. I think I covered the question. Did I miss anything on it, Liz?
No, I think that covered both aspects. So thank you for that, Dave.
You're welcome.
Terry, I know that, circuit specific questions, we had a few of those here, and we do want to follow up with folks on things that are more specific to circuits here in Santa Clarita Valley. I do have one from College of the Canyons, the Canyon Country Campus during PSPS events. Is there anything that could be done to support them during PSPS to avoid campus evacuations and disruptions of the educational process?
Yeah, if I remember correctly, and I may not remember this correctly, so somebody please correct me if I'm wrong. I think they're near the beginning of the circuit on the overhead portion, which would subject them to PSPS. However, and I believe they're on the Arlene, and with the Arlene, we did produce significant reductions. I mean, we do expect that to occur. We're covering all that wire. And short of extreme wind events, I don't think they would be as subject to PSPS. So I think they're in better shape. I'm going off of memory here, so apologize. But I think there is a greater likelihood, although not 100% here, that they would be less impacted. Eric, do you recall?
No, one thing I would suggest too is that if folks do have some circuit specific questions, I would suggest emailing those. I think Liz will provide an email address, and be glad to get back to people.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Okay, thank you for fielding that. I think we've gone through the bulk of the questions here, and I think we've answered most all that came in through the registration as well. Let me just backtrack here. I just want to first off thank Dave and Eric and Terry and others, but most importantly, I want to thank everybody tonight for participating this evening. As mentioned earlier, you will be receiving a survey to provide us feedback. In addition, this meeting has been recorded, so we will post the recording on our website. In a few days, it'll be up. You can find that at sce.com/wildfire, as well as other information and resources. And as Eric mentioned, we do have an email. It's wildfireoutreach@sce.com, and you can please pose some of those questions we weren't able to get to tonight at that particular email, and we'll be sure to respond. And thank you all again, and we wish you and your family very good health, and have a wonderful evening.